The first thing Hannah noticed was the sound of clicking, slow, deliberate clicks coming from her desk. Her manager was sitting in her chair, scrolling through her computer like it was his. He didn't ask permission. He didn't look rushed. He looked comfortable. When Hannah demanded to know what he was doing, he didn't stop. He casually said he was reviewing her work and suggested she should be grateful someone was paying attention. Then he opened a folder she had never shared. Her chest tightened as she recognized files meant only for her. Hannah told him to close it. He smirked instead. People who keep private folders at work usually regret it, he said, standing up slowly. He straightened his jacket, glanced at her screen one last time, and added, "Just looking out for the team." Then he walked out. Hannah sat down, hands trembling. I spent the next hour staring at her screen, unable to remember what she had been working on. Her thoughts kept replaying the way her manager's fingers moved through her folders, how confident he looked while doing it. He hadn't acted nervous. That scared her the most. When he finally called her into his office, he didn't mention the files right away. He asked vague questions about loyalty, about team culture, about whether she felt committed to the company long-term. Hannah answered carefully, her stomach twisting tighter with every word. Then he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "I noticed you document things," he said. "Very thoroughly." Hannah asked what he meant. He shrugged and said some people keep records for the wrong reasons. He warned her that misunderstandings could damage careers if they reached the wrong ears. The message was clear without being spoken. When Hannah left his office, she found an email waiting in her inbox. It was marked confidential. The subject line read, "Performance review, immediate action required." Her review wasn't due for months. She opened it, heart pounding, and saw phrases that didn't sound like her work at all. At the bottom was a meeting request with HR, scheduled for the next morning. Hannah realized then this wasn't curiosity. It was a move. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She replayed every project, every conversation, every moment she had trusted her manager to act professionally. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. What he'd crossed wasn't just a line. It was a boundary meant to keep people powerless. The next morning, before the HR meeting, Hannah checked her computer logs. She hadn't done this before. She hadn't needed to. What she found made her hands shake. Her files had been accessed late at night, after she'd gone home. Entire folders had been opened, copied, and renamed. Someone had tried to erase timestamps. Hannah printed everything. During the HR meeting, her manager spoke first. Calm, polished. He described Hannah as defensive and secretive. He implied she wasn't a team player and hinted she might be documenting coworkers for leverage. HR nodded thoughtfully. Then Hannah slid the papers across the table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply asked why her private files were accessed outside work hours, and why the access trail led directly to her manager's login. The room went quiet. HR stopped taking notes, and for the first time, Hannah saw uncertainty flash across her manager's face, right before he said something that changed everything. The uncertainty didn't last long. Hannah's manager recovered quickly, leaning forward as if he were helping clarify a misunderstanding. He claimed the access logs were part of a routine security review. He said leadership had concerns about information hoarding and that Hannah's folders raised red flags. Hannah felt the familiar pressure to doubt herself, but she didn't. She asked why the review wasn't documented. Why did no one inform her? Why did the access happen after business hours? HR exchanged a glance. The manager's jaw tightened. Then HR asked for copies of the logs. Hannah handed them over. The meeting ended abruptly. HR said they needed time. Hannah was told to return to work and keep things professional. As she walked back to her desk, her coworkers avoided eye contact. The silence felt intentional. By lunchtime, Hannah's system access was limited. Shared drives disappeared. Internal tools failed to load. No one explained why. She checked her phone and saw a calendar update. Her responsibilities had been reassigned, temporarily. No one had asked her. Then a message popped up from her manager. Let's reset expectations. Meet me after hours. Hannah stared at the screen. She realized this wasn't about policy anymore. It was about control. And whatever he planned to say next, he didn't want witnesses. Hannah didn't go to the meeting. Instead, she stayed late and copied everything, emails, access logs, task reassignments, policy documents. She worked quietly, heart racing, knowing every minute mattered. When she finally shut down her computer, she emailed herself a secure backup and logged out. The next morning, she arrived early. HR had scheduled a follow-up, but this time, Hannah wasn't alone. She had requested a formal mediator. Her manager looked surprised when he walked in and saw another person at the table. His tone changed instantly, calmer, softer, almost supportive. He said he worried Hannah felt overwhelmed and suggested a short leave might help her reset. Hannah recognized the tactic. She declined. Then she asked one question: why her access was restricted before any HR decision was made. The mediator asked for clarification. HR hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Hannah laid out the timeline. The late-night access. The copied folders. The performance review was sent early. The meeting request after hours. She didn't accuse, she connected dots. The room grew tense. Finally, HR said they needed to escalate this beyond the department. As the meeting ended, Hannah's manager leaned close and whispered, "You're making a mistake." Hannah met his eyes calmly. For the first time, she wasn't reacting. She was setting the direction. The escalation came faster than Hannah expected. By the end of the day, she received a formal notice stating her role was under temporary review. The wording was polite, but the message was clear. She was being sidelined. What unsettled her most wasn't the notice. It was the attachments. Screenshots. Out-of-context emails. Selective timestamps. Someone had curated a narrative that painted Hannah as disorganized and defensive. The manager had prepared this in advance. Hannah felt anger rise, sharp and focused. She noticed something important. Several screenshots were cropped too tightly. Key lines were missing. That meant the originals still existed somewhere. She forwarded the notice to her personal account and began reconstructing timelines. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Every issue referenced moments where she had pushed back, asked for clarity, or refused late-night requests. This wasn't about performance. It was retaliation. That night, Hannah received another message from HR requesting a wellness check-in. The language felt rehearsed, designed to sound supportive while undermining credibility. As she prepared her response, a new email arrived from an internal compliance address she'd never contacted before. "We've been notified of a concern involving your department. Please confirm availability." Hannah stared at the screen. Someone else had noticed. And this was no longer just internal politics. The compliance call was brief but unsettling. Hannah was asked neutral questions about access permissions, reporting lines, and documentation practices. The caller never mentioned her manager by name, but Hannah could tell they already knew where to look. After the call, she felt both relieved and exposed. By midday, whispers spread across the office. A meeting room had been booked under executive review. Senior leadership was involved now. Hannah's manager avoided her completely, communicating only through HR. Then came the shift. A coworker quietly told Hannah her manager was asking people to document concerning interactions with her. Another said they were warned not to share files. Hannah realized the strategy had changed. When intimidation failed, isolation followed. She decided to stop waiting. That afternoon, Hannah requested a copy of her full personnel file, every review, every note, every email referencing her performance. HR acknowledged the request but delayed the delivery. Minutes later, her manager finally spoke to her directly. He apologized. He said things had gone too far and suggested a private conversation to smooth things over before leadership misunderstood intentions. Hannah declined. Within an hour, she received a meeting invite titled Risk Mitigation Discussion. Attendees included legal. Hannah felt the ground shift beneath her. This wasn't damage control anymore. It was containment. The legal meeting felt clinical. Carefully chosen words. Measured pauses. No one raised their voice. Hannah listened as they framed the situation as a misalignment and emphasized the importance of cooperation. Then, legal asked Hannah if she had retained any personal copies of internal data. The question was loaded. Hannah answered honestly. She explained she preserved records after discovering unauthorized access to her workspace. She cited policy sections, numbers, not emotions. The room went quiet. Legal asked who accessed her files. Hannah named her manager. HR intervened, suggesting there may have been delegated authority. Hannah calmly presented the logs. Timestamped. Unedited. Legal requested a recess. When they returned, the tone had changed. Questions became sharper. HR looked uneasy. No one met Hannah's eyes. Then the legal asked one final question, whether Hannah believed retaliation had occurred. She said yes. She described the sequence, the boundary crossed, the access restrictions, the after-hours meeting request, the reassignment of duties. She didn't dramatize. She let the pattern speak. At the end, legal said they would conduct an independent review. As the meeting adjourned, her manager stood and said, "This doesn't have to be adversarial." Hannah replied evenly, "Then it shouldn't have been personal." That evening, an internal announcement went out. Her manager would be on leave pending review. The office buzzed. But Hannah knew this wasn't over yet. The next day, Hannah walked into a different atmosphere. People whispered openly now. Some avoided her. Others smiled cautiously, as if reassessing everything they thought they knew. HR scheduled another meeting, this time without her manager. They framed it as reassurance, but Hannah noticed how often they said company interests. She responded with documentation. Dates. Facts. Silence followed each point. Then HR revealed something unexpected. There had been prior complaints. Not formal ones. Concerns. Notes that never reached official review. Patterns that had been minimized and buried. Hannah wasn't the first. That realization hit harder than any accusation. HR admitted the company was exposed. Legal risk. Reputation risk. Leadership risk. They asked Hannah what she wanted. The question felt surreal. She asked for her access restored. Her role was reinstated. And a guarantee written that retaliation would not continue. HR hesitated. Then they agreed to draft terms. That afternoon, Hannah's access returned piece by piece. Tools unlocked. Calendars restored. Her role title reappeared. But one thing remained missing. An email from compliance arrived minutes before she left. The review has expanded. Additional findings suggest systemic issues. Hannah closed her laptop slowly. If this expanded any further, it wouldn't just change her situation. It would change the company. And someone was about to lose far more than authority. By the end of the week, the silence became louder than the rumors. Meetings were canceled without explanation. Executives stopped making eye contact. Hannah felt like the center of a storm. Everyone pretended wasn't happening. Then compliance requested a second interview. This time, they asked about culture, patterns, power. Hannah realized they weren't just investigating one manager anymore, they were tracing behavior up the ladder. After the call, Hannah checked her email and froze. A calendar invite had been added without her approval. The title read, Strategic Reassignment Discussion. She hadn't agreed to anything. HR followed up with a carefully worded message explaining it was temporary and meant to reduce friction. Hannah recognized the tactic immediately. They were trying to move her quietly, make the problem easier to manage. She replied with one sentence, "I do not consent to any reassignment during an active investigation." Minutes later, legal replied instead of HR. They acknowledged her refusal and asked for documentation supporting her claim of retaliation. Hannah sent everything. Late that night, she received a message from a coworker she barely knew. It was short and urgent. "I saw what they did to you. I kept screenshots. They asked me to lie." Hannah's pulse raced. She wasn't alone anymore. And someone else was ready to talk. The screenshots arrived just before dawn. Hannah scrolled through them slowly, her stomach tightening with each one. They showed internal chats, casual jokes about handling her, dismissive comments about her being too sensitive, and instructions to reframe events if questions came up. It wasn't just retaliation. It was coordination. The coworker asked one thing in return, anonymity. Hannah forwarded everything to compliance with a single note. This is no longer isolated. Within hours, leadership scheduled an emergency review. The meeting invite included executives Hannah had never spoken to before. During the call, no one interrupted her. She laid out the timeline, the access violations, the reassignment attempt, and the new evidence. The silence afterward felt heavy. Then someone finally spoke. They asked Hannah if she would be willing to stay on during the investigation, or she preferred a clean exit. The question stunned her. Hannah answered calmly. She said she hadn't caused the damage. She wasn't leaving quietly, so others could avoid consequences. That afternoon, an internal notice went out announcing a third-party audit of management practices. People stopped whispering. They started watching. But later that evening, Hannah received a private message from HR. "There's concern you're becoming disruptive." She stared at the screen. They were still trying. And now they were afraid. The next move came fast. Hannah's manager officially resigned for personal reasons. The announcement praised his leadership and thanked him for years of service. No mention of the investigation. No accountability. At first, it felt like defeat. Then compliance called again. They explained the resignation didn't end the review, it accelerated it. Emails had already been archived. Access logs preserved. Statements recorded.
Hannah listened carefully as they asked if she'd be open to participating in a broader inquiry. She said yes. That evening, she noticed something else shift. Colleagues who once avoided her now asked questions. Quiet apologies. Nervous confessions. Some admitted they'd stayed silent out of fear. Hannah felt the weight of it. This wasn't just about her boundary anymore. HR attempted one final maneuver. They offered a severance package, generous, immediate, confidential. All she had to do was walk away. Hannah asked for the terms in writing. When they arrived, she read the clause slowly. A non-disclosure agreement. Permanent silence. She closed the document. Then she forwarded it to legal. Her reply was simple: "I'm not for sale." The next morning, the audit scope doubled. And the leadership stopped calling it miscommunication. They started calling it exposure. The audit results began leaking before they were finalized. Departments were flagged. Policies rewritten overnight. Training sessions became mandatory. Hannah watched it unfold from the inside. One afternoon, she was asked to provide testimony, not as a complaint, but as a witness. Legal explained her experience helped establish intent. That word stuck with her. Intent. This hadn't been accidental. It had been deliberate. When she finished, legal thanked her and asked one final question. Would she consider stepping into an advisory role during restructuring? Hannah hadn't expected that. She said she'd think about it. Later that day, HR reached out again, this time differently. No pressure. No threats. Just acknowledgement. They admitted mistakes. It wasn't an apology, but it was close. Then a message came from the coworker who had sent the screenshots. They said others were coming forward too. Statements. Emails. Recordings. Hannah felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The system hadn't just failed her, it had failed many. That night, leadership sent a company-wide message. They confirmed findings of misconduct at multiple levels. Disciplinary action was underway. Hannah read the last line twice. "We are committed to restoring trust." She closed her laptop. Trust wasn't restored with words. It was restored with consequences. And those were finally coming. The final meeting took place in a room Hannah had never entered before. Executives sat across from her, not as authority figures, but as listeners. They offered her a choice. She could return to her role with protections in place, or transition into a new position shaping policy and oversight. Either way, retaliation clauses would be enforced. Violations would carry penalties. Hannah asked for time. When she stepped outside, her phone buzzed. It was a message from HR confirming multiple terminations were underway. Quiet ones. Permanent ones. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Later that evening, Hannah made her decision. She chose the advisory role. Not for status, but for leverage. Weeks later, her manager's resignation was reclassified. The truth came out internally. Training changed. Reporting lines shifted. Hannah no longer felt small walking into work. People listened. The company moved forward bruised but altered. On her desk sat a printed copy of the policy she helped rewrite. Clear boundaries. Real consequences. She traced the header with her finger and thought back to the moment everything changed, when one line was crossed. They had tried to silence her. Instead, they handed her the power. And this time, she knew exactly how to use it. The first policy review meeting tested everything Hannah believed she had earned. Executives nodded when she spoke, but not all of them agreed. Some pushed back gently, questioning timelines and budgets. Others stayed silent, watching to see how far this new balance of power really went. Then one executive said it out loud. They asked if Hannah's involvement created perception issues. The room went still. Hannah didn't raise her voice.
She didn't argue.
She asked one question instead, whether accountability felt uncomfortable only because it had never applied equally before. No one answered. After the meeting, an internal memo circulated clarifying Hannah's authority and independence. It wasn't defensive. It was firm. Later that day, she received a message from a junior employee thanking her for speaking up months earlier, even when it cost her. Hannah reread it twice. The impact was spreading beyond policy. But that night, an anonymous email landed in her inbox. It accused her of exaggeration, ambition, and playing the victim for power. She felt the old doubt creep in. Then she remembered the evidence. The resignations. The audit. She archived the message without responding. The truth didn't need defending anymore. Still, she knew something else was coming. People don't challenge systems quietly without creating enemies. And some of them weren't finished yet. The backlash arrived disguised as concern. An executive requested a private check-in, framing it as support. The questions, however, felt strategic about Hannah's stress levels, her workload, her emotional resilience. Hannah recognized the angle instantly. She answered professionally and documented everything afterward. Within days, rumors surfaced again. Whispers that Hannah was difficult, that she slowed progress, that reform was hurting productivity. Then the data arrived. Quarterly reports showed the opposite. Complaints were down. Retention was up. Exit interviews referenced feeling safer. Hannah shared the numbers publicly during a leadership briefing. No commentary, just facts. The room shifted. That afternoon, she was looped into a confidential update. The external auditors had finalized their report. Several senior leaders were implicated, not just in silence but in active suppression. The board would review consequences next. Hannah felt the weight of it. This wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. That evening, she walked past the office where her former manager once sat. The door was empty now. The nameplate is gone. She didn't feel satisfied. She felt closure. But as she packed up for the night, her phone buzzed with a message from legal. Tomorrow will be public. Hannah knew the company, and her role in its future was about to change forever. The announcement went live before the workday began. Multiple leaders were placed on leave pending termination. Others resigned outright. The company acknowledged systemic failures and outlined corrective actions. Hannah watched the internal reactions roll in shock, relief, disbelief. Then the external response followed. Industry forums buzzed. Analysts weighed in. The company's transparency was praised cautiously, but the spotlight was unforgiving. Hannah was asked to join a live internal forum to answer employee questions. She hesitated. Then she agreed. She spoke plainly. About boundaries. About silence. About why power must be questioned, not protected. No drama. No names. Just the truth. Afterward, her inbox filled with messages from employees across departments. Some thanked her. Others apologized for staying quiet. One message stood out. It said, "You made it safer for people like me." Hannah sat with that for a long time. Later that day, the board finalized her role permanently. Her position now reported directly to them, not management. It was written into policy. The shift was undeniable. As she left the building, a reporter called her name from across the street. She didn't stop. This story wasn't for headlines. It was for systems that needed changing. And for the first time, Anna felt certain this wasn't the end. It was the foundation. Weeks passed, and the chaos settled into structure. Training programs launched. Reporting lines hardened. Oversight committees gained teeth. What once felt symbolic now felt real. Hannah noticed it in small ways. People spoke up sooner. Meetings felt different. Decisions were documented, not whispered. One afternoon, HR requested a final review session, not for damage control, but for closure. They asked Hannah what the company still didn't understand. She answered honestly. That culture doesn't change because someone is removed. It changes when people believe consequences are inevitable. They wrote it down. As the session ended, Hannah walked past the lobby screens displaying the company's updated values. Accountability sat at the top. She smiled faintly. That evening, she packed away old notes, screenshots, timelines, reminders of how it all began. She didn't need them anymore. Before shutting down her laptop, she received one last message from legal confirming the final outcomes were sealed. No appeals. No reversals. Hannah closed the screen and leaned back. She hadn't planned to change the power dynamic. She had just refused to accept the old one. And that refusal, quiet, documented, unwavering, had done more than retaliation ever could. It had rewritten the rules. And this time they applied to everyone. The company thought the storm had passed. Hannah knew better. Change always invites testing. A senior director challenged one of the new enforcement decisions, citing business urgency. The request was subtle but clear. Bend once, quietly. Hannah refused. She cited policy, precedent, and the board's mandate. The director smiled tightly and backed off, but the message was sent. Later that week, Hannah learned that several departments were quietly lobbying to dilute the reforms in the next quarter. Nothing illegal, just erosion by delay. So she moved first. She scheduled a cross-department review, mandatory attendance, transparent agendas. Every delay, every exception request would now be visible. No shadows left. The tension in the room was unmistakable. After the meeting, a colleague warned her that she was making powerful people nervous. Hannah thanked them. That night, she reviewed her own journey from isolation to influence and realized something had shifted inside her. She wasn't bracing anymore. She wasn't afraid of being disliked because she understood now. Resistance meant the system was working. The next morning, she received notice that an external watchdog group had cited the company as a case study in reform.
Public. Permanent.
The power dynamic hadn't just changed internally. It had become visible. And once seen, it couldn't be undone. Recognition brought scrutiny. Hannah was invited to speak on an internal leadership panel about ethical boundaries. The invitation felt ceremonial until she saw the attendee list. Executives. Board observers. Legal counsel. This wasn't symbolic. During the session, someone asked whether her actions had cost the company talent. Hannah answered without hesitation.
Yes.
And losing people unwilling to respect boundaries wasn't a loss, it was alignment. The room went quiet. Afterward, an executive approached her privately and admitted they had once dismissed her concerns as overreactions. They apologized. Hannah accepted it but noted something important. It hadn't taken kindness to change the system. It had taken structure. That evening, she reviewed a draft of the company's annual report. Her recommendations were embedded throughout, uncredited but unmistakable. That was fine. This had never been about visibility. Later, she received a message from someone she didn't expect, her former manager's assistant. They thanked Hannah for giving them the courage to leave and report their own experience elsewhere. Hannah stared at the screen. The ripple effects were still moving. And she realized something else. The story wasn't over yet. Because one final decision remained hers. The board offered Hannah something unexpected. A promotion. Broader authority. A chance to lead reform across multiple divisions. It was power, real power. But it came with a condition. Relocation. Silence on future public commentary. Distance from the work that made her visible. Hannah asked for time. That night, she walked through the city alone, replaying every compromise she had refused and every cost she had paid. She didn't want influence without integrity. The next day, she countered. She would accept, on her terms, full transparency clauses, protected autonomy, no restrictions on advocacy. The board hesitated. Then they agreed. The contract was revised. When Hannah signed, she felt something settle. This wasn't survival anymore. It was authorship. That afternoon, the company announced the new structure publicly. Analysts noted the shift immediately. Hannah didn't celebrate. She prepared. Because power doesn't erase responsibility, it multiplies it. As she closed her office door, she received one final update from compliance. An unresolved case, long buried, had resurfaced due to the new review standards. It traced back years before Hannah, and its implications were bigger than anyone expected. The resurfaced case changed everything. It revealed a pattern older than the recent scandal, systemic, deliberate, and deeply protected. What Hannah had uncovered was only the surface. Legal teams scrambled. The board convened emergency sessions. Hannah was asked to lead the internal response. This time, there was no resistance, only urgency. As she reviewed the files, she understood the scale of what had been hidden and why the system had fought so hard to stay intact. Fixing it would be costly. Not fixing it would be unforgivable. Hannah presented a plan that included disclosures, restitution, and independent oversight. It was bold. It was risky. It passed unanimously. That night, as the company prepared for public reckoning, Hannah sat alone in her office, lights dimmed, city glowing beyond the glass. She thought about the moment it all began, the boundary crossed, the silence that followed, the decision not to accept it. She hadn't set out to dismantle anything. She had just refused to be erased. Tomorrow, the full truth would come out. And when it did, the story wouldn't be about her anymore. It would be about what happens when someone finally says no and means it. The truth didn't leak. It detonated. By morning, internal documents were circulating among regulators, journalists, and legal teams. Patterns emerged fast. Years of protected behavior. Quiet payouts. Strategic silence. Hannah was called into an emergency board meeting before noon. This time, no one questioned her authority. She laid out the findings calmly, outlining how the system had been designed to protect the wrong people while punishing those who spoke up. The room was tense, but no one interrupted, because the evidence spoke louder than outrage. The board voted unanimously to self-report. It would cost millions. Careers. Reputations. But the alternative was worse. After the meeting, Hannah sat alone in her office, staring at the city skyline. She felt no triumph, only clarity. This was bigger than revenge. Later that day, she received an email from her former manager's lawyer requesting a private discussion. Hannah declined. There was nothing left to say. That evening, news alerts lit up her phone. Headlines framed the story as a turning point. A reckoning. Hannah turned the phone face down. Tomorrow, the public would hear the full story. And once they did, there would be no going back. The press conference was scheduled for noon. By 10, the building was surrounded. Hannah watched from a quiet conference room as executives rehearsed statements filled with careful language and legal buffers. When it was her turn to speak, she ignored the script. She spoke plainly. She described the boundary that had been crossed, the silence that followed, the system that rewarded compliance and punished resistance. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. The room was silent when she finished. Within minutes, clips were everywhere. Employees across the company began sharing their own stories, some publicly, some anonymously. Patterns echoed Hannah's experience almost word for word. The fallout was immediate. Senior leaders resigned. Investigations expanded. Policies were rewritten in real time. That afternoon, Hannah received hundreds of messages. Gratitude, relief, recognition. But one message stood out. From a junior employee. I didn't quit today because of you. Hannah sat back, breathing slowly. This was the moment the power truly shifted, not at the top, but everywhere else. And for the first time since it began, Hannah felt something unfamiliar.
Peace.
Weeks later, the office felt different. Quieter.
Cleaner.
The old tension, the unspoken fear, was gone. In its place was caution, yes, but also trust. Hannah walked through the halls without being watched. The board finalized the reform package under external oversight. Compensation funds were established. Reporting channels expanded. No shortcuts this time. Hannah was offered another promotion, broader reach, higher visibility. She declined. Instead, she proposed something else. A new role focused on prevention, accountability, and education. Long-term change, not damage control. It was approved immediately. Outside the company, the story kept spreading. Commentators debated it. Employees in other industries referenced it. Policies elsewhere began to shift. Hannah didn't chase the attention. She focused on the work. One evening, she packed up her desk early and stepped into the fading light outside. The city felt larger somehow. Not hostile, just open. She hadn't won by destroying anyone. She had won by refusing to disappear. And that mattered more. A year later, Hannah received an invitation. A panel on workplace power and boundaries. She almost declined, then accepted. When asked what changed everything, she didn't mention policies or promotions. She said this: "I stopped protecting a system that wouldn't protect me." The audience was silent. Afterward, a woman approached her, nervous but hopeful. She said she was dealing with something similar and didn't know what to do. Hannah listened. Then she answered honestly, "Document everything. Trust yourself. And remember, power only works when we pretend we don't have any." That night, Hannah went home, closed the door, and sat in the quiet. No alerts, no meetings, just space. She thought about how it all started, with one cross line, one moment of disbelief, one decision not to stay silent. She hadn't planned to change the power dynamic. She had just chosen herself. And that choice had changed everything.